It's Friday, April 14th, 2023. My name is Ashton Ellett, here with another installment of the two-party Georgia Oral History Project, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library for Political Research and Studies here at the University of Georgia. I'm on St. Simon's Island with Mr. Milton Woodside, better known around these parts, the state and the country as Woody Woodside. Mr. Woodside is a native of Clinton, North Carolina. He attended Fishburne Military School in Waynesboro, Virginia, and was graduated from the Citadel in 1970. Afterward, he devoted more than 20 years to the U.S. Army and Georgia Army National Guard. A Glenn County resident since 1973, he served as a staffer for U.S. Representatives Bo Ginn and later Lindsey Thomas, both of whom represented Georgia's 1st Congressional District. He became president of the Brunswick Golden Isles Chamber of Commerce in 1985, a position he held for 34 years, retiring in 2019. Woody, thank you so much for taking your afternoon to talk history and politics, a little bit about your life and career.
Asked by you to do so.
Well, I look forward to a really good conversation. I wonder if we can begin. Tell me a little bit about your childhood and upbringing growing up in rural North Carolina.
Sure. I was born in 1947, and I'm the oldest of 5 kids. My mom and dad from Charlotte, North Carolina, my mom from near Mars Hill, North Carolina. And I was born in Durham, and my dad had just gotten back from World War II and had survived the Bataan Death March, was a fighter pilot, and got called in the Philippines and spent 3.5 years in a Japanese concentration camp and coal mines outside of Yamada, Osaka, Japan, and came back, had us, and he went back to Duke after graduating from the Citadel himself, and became a hospital administrator, and went down in 1949 to Sampson County, North Carolina, Clinton, and basically built a hospital up, and it was a regional hospital. I was raised there, went to high school in Fishburne Military School, as you mentioned, in the mountains of Virginia, and then went down to the Citadel and graduated where my dad had, and went into the Army, and that's pretty well it as far as.
Well, why'd you get shipped off to Fishburne? Was that also a family tradition or family legacy to go to military school?
Not really. I didn't really care about going, but when I did go, I was homesick for about 3 weeks.
Sure.
Went 3 years there and played football and ran track and basketball. And I had asthma as a young student, so I think I really went up there more or less, I think, to improve my grades to be able to go to a decent college.
Now, you mentioned that your father attended the Citadel. Was that the plan for you to also follow in your father's footsteps, or how'd that come about?
I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I had a dad who was pretty encouraging to have me go down and visit it, and I went down with him, and saw it's an unusual regimentation, but I didn't know exactly what I was going to get into. And he kind of patted me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, son, why don't you try my college out? If you like it, I think it'd be good. And if you don't, well, you can go somewhere else." Well, first year in the '60s, pretty regimented as far as trying to keep you on tap with your grades when you had other curricular activities that the upperclassmen had for you. But either way, I did. I stuck it out.
Extracurricular activities.
Best day of his life was to be able to present me my diploma.
Yeah.
And the best day of my life, and that happened in 1970.
And what'd you major in while you were in
political science and history?
Good man. Those are my majors as well.
And the draft was on.
Sure.
You had a choice by your junior year to sign a contract to go into.
Okay, I was wondering how that worked.
With that, they had all branches of service, and I was Army, and you could take a chance to draft or sign a contract for a commission. So
sure.
I signed, and my draft number was 296. My college roommate, he was 11. His was 11, and he didn't sign. So he got drafted and had to go in the military and get his commission back when I had it. So either way, that's what happened.
Seeming like that would have been the other way if
Yeah. So that's most of the kids back then were having that contract with all the Vietnam era going on. And today, our enrollment up there is about 2,300. It's always been about that.
Mm-hmm. So you signed your commitment with the Army. What was your assignment in the military?
I entered infantry officer basic school and became an infantry officer, graduated there, and they had cut back in Vietnam and started a volunteer army. And I could either stay in or get out, and I felt like, well, if I'm not going to be going over to Vietnam, I just get out. So I did. But a couple years later, I realized I needed to I had a commission. Why not try to get into the Georgia Guard? And that's what happened. So I've spent most of my time in the Guard with the 48th Infantry Brigade of the Georgia Guard. And I guess the highlight of it was being mobilized for Desert Storm. You know, when you're in your mid-40s, by that time, it's a lot different from the vinegar you have. And
sure.
The pucker factors were pretty high.
So what brought you from North Carolina, South Carolina? Were you just moving down the coast? Is that how it worked?
No, I actually, I'll tell you about that later. But South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia, the people are pretty well similar as far as the friendliness and the atmosphere really of those coasts are similar. But I didn't really think about that. I was working for an electrical contracting company out of Charleston after I got out of the Army in Atlanta. And through mutual friends, I met this fellow named Bo Ginn, who had come back to Georgia after being an AA, as they call them then, but chief of staff for a House member for 5 years and then sent to Talmadge for 6 years.
Right.
And had come back to Georgia and was working part-time with a company in Atlanta, and I was staying at the home of the second family of my hours in Atlanta, and they introduced me to Bo. And we had lunch a couple of times, and then he indicated he was getting ready to go after running for Congress in the 1st Congressional District. Excuse me, and I got offered an opportunity. He asked me if I'd like to come down to Milton, Georgia, and he's going to run for first district of Georgia, and the House. And he said, we can win as easily as lose, but you'll learn a lot. So I took the chance. I could put about everything I had in my little sports car, and I moved to Milton, Georgia, and that was in December of '71. Okay. Late December. And maybe a month or two later, along came someone else, Bob Hurt. And then another fella came along, and we all stayed in that big home of Bo's wife's family that he'd restored. And it was kind of unusual to have 3 pretty young guys living in the small town of Milton, Georgia. And I had a Corvette, and Bob had an XKE.
Jaguar, yeah.
And the other guy had a Z car. So either way,
very low, keeping a low profile in Milton, Georgia.
So we did, and so that's how it all began. And
now when you moved down to Milton in December, in January, in there, did you think that that was the start? That's where you'd be spending the better part of your life was coastal Georgia?
I had no idea. I really didn't.
Right.
And I had the opportunity. I was going to want to stay, and I didn't really care that much really about going to D.C. I liked the coast of Georgia. I did like Savannah, and when Bo won, I asked him if I think I'd rather be in Savannah and let me do the same thing but down there, and that's what was going to happen. Then about several weeks later, Bo had this, I want you to get a little bit of experience up there. You need to go up there. So that's what happened.
Well, before we talk about that, I want to take a step back and talk about the campaign, because the real campaign was in the Democratic primary, because Bo decided to run against his old boss, Ellett Hagen. In that
he didn't bother to tell me about that.
So you didn't know
about that. Evidently, I remember having some good conversations, trying to learn about this thing called politics a little bit with him, and we're sitting around a kitchen table one time, and sometime in early January, and he said, here, sometime very soon I'm going to have to qualify. And I qualify as either a Democrat or a Republican. And I said, well, tell me about that. He said, what do you think y'all do? And I was learning. And he said, well, let me just put it, the simple way to tell you is that in these 20 counties, if I qualify as a Republican, I'm starting 30% down. And I said, well, I think you'd ought to run as one of the Democrat things.
One of those Democrats.
That's how much I do. And so that started the whole thing, and started working those counties. First time redistricting had happened in that decade. That first time in history that Georgia's coast would be serve under one of the House members. Glenn County and Camden County and Charlton County were taken out of Bill Stuckey's 8th
district. It used to be the 8th district. Yeah.
So he got down there real early in that race, hitting, and he was already well known because little did I, having been an AA to the congressman for 5 years, and helped the congressman get elected the third time he ran, he knew everyone.
Right.
And then also serving 6 years with Senator Talmadge, he certainly knew about it. He had a way of getting around, and certainly what led to him not only getting elected, his successful venture for 10 years in the U.S. House showed, because he wasn't a newcomer to begin with.
Right. Well, tell me, how would you describe Bo Ginn to somebody who's watching this now, and Bo's been gone for many years now, and may not know who he was or what his politics were like, or what his personality was?
Extremely outgoing. He had growing up in Southwest Georgia, and he was a very accommodating individual. Did not take advantage of, certainly I could say that for the 10 years or more that I was around him, take advantage of your time as an individual or as a family member serving him. Sense of humor was exceptional. He had a great sense of trust, and he was known, and I think even Senator Dunn who got elected at the same time with him. I think he looked to Bo a lot for guidance and dealing with constituent services and the political process of committees and how to pursue different things, and especially it's all about building relationships, and that's what made him so successful. So, and I think probably he trusted us more than anything to go all out to help, to assist as if he did in constituent services. I did not particularly like when he got elected Washington for about up there almost a year. Did get robbed. Apartment got robbed. And
this was the 1970s after all.
This is in '73, and I asked him, I said, well, I told you I wanted to stay down there. I just really think I would learn more down there if you give me a Watts line and give me a congressional directory. It really was like
For young folks like me, what was a Watts line? Is that a direct,
they called it
long
an
distance?
FTS line, and it was a federal, in the federal offices.
Okay.
And so that's, now I guess, I don't know how they do that now, just regular phone lines, Watts, whatever.
Cell phones.
We had no computers. We had no copy machines. They call them robo machines. You've probably heard about them. They'd circulate. In handling constituent services, I just keep a file. And we didn't have we'd put it in a computer and send it to another office or to Washington to handle that particular service. we would actually have that congressional directory, and every agency had a congressional liaison.
Right.
And Region 4 for 8 states in Atlanta, we had a person that dealt in every area, and most of the time they had about 48 hours or 72 hours to get back to that congressional office with some type of a solution of where it's going. It doesn't work that way.
No.
And it really, and I keep a file, and they'd call the person, they'd come in a district office, which Bo believed in that district concept.
Yeah.
Those people would come to you, and they would come walk right in the office, and you had to give them an answer, or either I'll be back in touch with you, or 2 days later, and that's how it all worked. And it's a lot of fun. Keep a file on it, check it off when it's done, keep the time, date, information, put it up. If I needed to write a letter or for Bo to sign, there was no faxing, so I would write a letter, draft a letter as a staffer would do for a member of Congress.
Sure.
On either the issue or whatever, and use my little clickers to correctotype and all that, put it in an envelope and frank it up to Bo a few days in advance for the mail to get there, and let him sign it and send it out to him.
So what was your official job title?
I guess I probably might have been a Brunswick office manager or administrative manager. Titles really weren't that much of a deal for us. What is really unique about those days is the congressional delegation. I think could have been about 10 members.
It would have been 10
members
at that time.
And invariably, all of our staffs, and that's what's really lacking today, were pretty much interchangeable, representing each other's interests. We had, in the case of something that would be of mutual interest to, at that time, would have been to Talmadge and to Nunn. And I was down here, and although Mary Jane Salter was the closest one for Senator Nunn up in Savannah, but I'd call and say, I'm going to be here and I'll cover for y'all if you want me to. And then I'd feed them, and I would represent their interest, and they'd announce that. And it'd go right back to them, so we're covering for each other.
Right.
You don't see as much of that anymore, and you certainly, there was a lot of interactivity as far as being able to work across the aisle. Bo was notorious for being able to do that, and that came, the biggest example was in 1974 when Bo was in the thralls of landing Fletzy. After screening 73 bases in the country, he went to Sons of Talmadge, and they got down to 5 locations. 2 of them were in Georgia, and both asked Sons not to mention Albany, Georgia. Just say, I heard you told Secretary Simon, who was in the Treasury Department, it was Secretary of Treasury, because Fletzy came under Treasury, the new one, and he said, don't mention anything about Albany. Just say, heard he's thinking about Georgia. They're looking at Georgia. And he said, I appreciate you doing that very much. And that's all it took. I think Talmadge, because he was vice chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, and he made the shots for the Treasury, for Treasury.
If he didn't, Russell Long could.
And so it was fun. But the point of that was that 2 days later, when Bo and Talmadge and Sam flew down to Brunswick, the federal courthouse, to make the announcement, Bo was, of course, emceeing, and he thanked everybody and gave him credit. And he said, I especially want to recognize the support, because without him it would probably not be possible, of Senator Mac Mattingly, who was the state party chairman, sitting right here, and thank you very much, Mac. You wouldn't see that today.
No, not very. I mean, so, the opposing state party chair wouldn't be on the dais. That's for sure. So, what committees did Congressman Ginn work on? What was his? So you talked about Senator Talmadge and his specialty with finance and agriculture. What was it like for a House member? Did Congressman Ginn have an area where he was considered to have particular strength or expertise?
Well, having that 11 years as administrative assistant to a House member and a senator gave him particular strengths on know where to go to do what and who, especially the who in the House and Senate, where the strengths were to work those.
Right.
He was very active in Public Works, on the House Public Works Committee, and he became very powerful in the House Appropriations Committee, and ultimately chaired the Milcon subcommittee,
military construction,
on military construction, which aided in a lot of things dealing with anything in Georgia's military establishment, especially with what you saw happen with the continued growth and rebirth, actually reactivation of Fort Stewart at the very first of that area, and then certainly Kings Bay.
Kings Bay Naval Station.
Then on top of it, when you, for a long time, you had maybe Bo over in the House dealing with it. You had Sam Nunn moving on up those ranks very quickly on armed services in the Senate, and that was a pretty good, powerful punch.
Right. So it sort of harkens back to when you had Russell and Benson in the House or in the Senate and the House, respectively.
They were actually. What I thought I mentioned is they were both. Senator Nunn and Bo were elected the same night in 1972. And I'll never forget the next morning, Sam and Bo flew down to Brunswick, Georgia for that tragedy that happened the same night they got elected when the the Sidney Lanier Bridge collapsed and killed a dozen people.
Right.
And so, anyway.
Wow. So, what in your years of service with the congressman, what would you say you've already mentioned several of them, and you might mention those again, but what were his signature accomplishments during his 10 or so 10 years in the House?
Well, I mean, all these different projects and stuff. He was really good with his staff, and staff. We all, of course, with Bob and everything. Our activity with each other. We did not have to write a full report or anything to submit like so many staffs I hear about. They have to write a weekly who all you talk to or something like that or business with. We spent all our time doing that, but I guess going through thinking about the crises that he addressed, we had a shrimp crisis where the shrimp seasons were awful and disastrous, and we had to get declarations to get SBA assistance for them. But before that happened, we had a crisis down in Cuba, if you remember, with Carter was president. And
are you referring to the Mariel boat lift?
The boat lift type stuff, yeah. And apparently, I think there was, in the Carter administration, there was encouragement, well, there's no problem if you want to go down there and help out, that could help you. It wouldn't, we won't hurt you, we won't stop you. And it was kind of an encouragement to take your shrimp boats down and get all these people out. Well, that was going on for quite a while. There's a massive effort going on with it, and all of a sudden, the Carter administration slammed the door and said, they started confiscating boats coming back with all the Cubans. And you better believe that caused Bo a lot of headaches with all these. Georgia's one state, and all the people in their boats were confiscated. And he couldn't really get anyone's ear over in the administration about it. But one person in that administration who did got the ear of it, got it done to help them out and release those boats, and release most of them, was Burt Lance.
Right, right.
In that administration, he was powerful. That's okay. That's the area. And then, of course, the efforts to bring FLETC here. That was really a cool story.
Tell me about, because when I think of federal law enforcement training, I think Northern Virginia, Maryland, some places close to the Metro DC area. Why and how did they settle on coastal Georgia for that training center?
I think you've got to think of the wider side of the house here, because we were starting to get into base closures, which that's what happened.
Right.
And there was 70-something of them in college campuses and everything across the nation. That's where they went with it. We've even had cases since then, as you know, in the last few years, where there was a site I think it was in Maryland that the whole area around there didn't want any kind of, but they hit those bases hard, and I think the committees went out and did a good job. The staff here, Bo needed to get together. I guess I could probably say it is a dear friend of ours who actually worked for the little new animal called FLETC, Consolidated Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. Was a fellow named Will Eddington, and Will helped us, I think, with his relationship, with Bob Hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew what we needed to go after trying to emphasize on, and we did. And down here, as a staffer locally, I had to help focus on the needs they needed very quickly about statistics, education, everything else, traffic, routes, air service,
sewer capability.
we got right down to the point where decision was about to be made, and the air carrier we had at that time was going defunct.
Uh-oh. Oh, yeah, this was deregulation.
Air service was over on St. Simon's.
Right.
And they were cutting them off at the pump. And Bo was able to contact Sheriff Ron or whoever it was, and ask them if they could keep it going because it was down to about 2 weeks and we didn't need publicity that we don't have air service.
No, it wouldn't have been good.
And so that was really a highlight when that decision was made.
You mentioned Will. Was he was appropriations committee staffer, right?
What happened is after Will was here, I came down here with him and helped get started with him. He and I became very friends. We played golf in the afternoons after work. I had a beer a hole, and I got him up to owing me 60 beers. And then he got hired. Bo offered him a position to go with appropriations. And so he doubled back on me 2 beers a hole, and I lost. I think I owed him when he left. But Will went up there and made a great career.
Right. And he actually went into business with the congressman.
He did, and he's been very successful in a similar line with Bob Hurt, Bob all these years.
Right, and Rogers.
That's how that really happened.
Yeah.
It worked hard on things like Cumberland Island and appropriations there. Although that was a follow-on to what had happened right under Stuckey.
Right, when that was in the old 8th District.
That stayed ongoing. And then the whole effort with Kings Bay, the only thing that was down there in that beautiful little harbor at that time, back when Bo got elected, I think that there were about 3 individuals that I know of. The mayor of Kingsland, a very colorful guy, and a big family, McCarthy family, and a few others got together with him and showed him that beautiful property down there and said, look, the National Guard and Reserves come down here and camp out, do exercises. But other than that, that's all there is, except that Blue Star Shipping Company down there that ships munitions. We want you to give that back to us, or y'all do something with it. And then all that stuff popped up about the lobbying effort. I well remember our congressional delegation lobbying with it, and I do remember actually flying down with Bob Hurt down to Cape Canaveral, getting on the USS Daniel Webster and going out to sea because it's going to be, they were testing a new Poseidon, trident missile on it, Poseidon.
Were you Army guys all right on the ship?
Yeah, could not really tell you anything. You were down. You're like sitting in this room.
Yeah. Oh wow.
But when they told you that we're going to shoot this thing, when we shoot this thing, if something goes wrong with the motor on it, it'll melt the whole ship in 9 seconds. Either way, that's. It turned out that location was set, but I do remember Bob coming down and picking me up with a helicopter, a pilot from Fort Stewart, and to run us down to look at Cumberland Island down there, that Dungeness, because we had a delegation congressionally coming down with the Navy to entertain them and show them the area. We could have a function over on Cumberland. And so here Bob and I are in one of those OH-58s or whatever, and going down below level of creeks and all the way down the beach line to Cumberland to check it all out.
Oh, wow.
I remember when the group came down, I think they stayed over on St. Simon's at one of the resorts. And I sat at a table with this Navy captain and chatted with him and found out it was John McCain.
Get out of here.
Sitting there. He actually came, yeah.
Wow.
So that was probably, a lot of people indicated, of course, I think everybody had a lot to do with it, certainly Bo and Milton.
Sure.
And Sam. And then I think a lot of people, some people said no, it was Congressman Bennett from Jacksonville, but I don't think that was the case.
Right. Well, tell me, you mentioned somebody earlier, Mac Mattingly. How did that working relationship? Because you were talking about how well Bo worked with Herman Talmadge's old boss, Sam Nunn. What happened? What was how did it work when Mac Mattingly came on the scene as a new senator, and Mac Mattingly was on the MilCon committee at the Senate level? Did Bo and Mac work well together?
I'm sure they did. I've never heard anything other than that with them. I feel confident. Bill Stewart was a local CPA here in Glenn County. Went up there as his chief of staff, and so we had a lot.
Is Bill still down here, or did he?
He's here.
He's
sure, he's right here. Also, he had a staffer named Woody Woodward. Mm-hmm. And she became after she left him, she was very reliable. Our names got mixed up a good bit.
I was getting ready to say, man, that's a little...
We both, and I have not talked to her recently, but
I think she's down in Florida, isn't she?
In Florida, but she became the deputy administrator for FAA.
Oh, that's right.
And she was most influential, and still is. I think she's still active in the aviation industry lobbying.
Interesting. So tell me what role, or how did you learn that Bo was thinking about running for governor? And I went back and I looked at some of the news stories, and for a couple years it was the rumors were that Bo was going to be running for governor because George Busby, who was the first two-four-year term governor, was term limited, so it was going to be an open seat. What were those conversations like, and when were you privy to them?
I guess pretty early. I mean, I think he had, even when he may have been running for the House, I don't remember then, but later, sometime during all that mix, when I first met him, on one of those lunches, I was walking out of the restaurant with him. I said, hey, Bo, I noticed you must have purchased, you must have bought a new pair of shoes and the heels rubbed wrong on your shoe. And he says, no, I had polio. And I felt like, oh. So, and he made me feel right, easy about it. and then later on told me about how he had the chance to play pro baseball in high school, and he ended up at Warm Springs, and I think he's told me that story before, that I guess it would be Herman Talmadge's daddy had visited down there, and evidently had kind of encouraged Bo and said, one day you need to get up and go run for this, something like this. And he never forgot it. And that was the point that he always had a drive in my mind.
So the seed was planted.
He was planted from that day back then, ingrained. One day he was going to do that. And when I found out that was in '81, he decided to tell everybody he was going to run, and he decided to run. And I begged him. Some other staff members did too, probably. I haven't talked to Bob that much about it.
Yeah.
He said he was definitely going to run, and I said, well, we encourage you to do otherwise.
Really?
And he announced he was running, and everyone was jumping around to jump on the ship. And about a month later, we talked him back out of it.
Right.
When that happened, a bunch of people immediately went over to Joe Frank's side. Most of them.
Right.
And I think what happened also was that Norman Underwood was in the thralls. He had already run statewide against Talmadge, and so everybody thought he was going to be the one to catch. So when Bo got back in, he was the last one of 10 to be in that primary.
Oh, it was a big primary, yeah.
And so that's pretty well what happened. And then a lot of it, the rest of the political side of that.
Did you stay on congressional payroll, or did you join the campaign?
That's funny. When he said he's going to do that, I said, well, Bo, look, I started with you 10 years ago and this stuff. You're not going to leave me sitting here on a congressional staff for this thing. And I said, what can happen? And I said, what can I do? He said, well, okay, I'm going to give you 30 days, 30 or 35 days to go over to Southwest Georgia and get me county chairs and work for organizations for the 30 counties up there. Then you come on into Atlanta to the headquarters up there and be there the rest of the time. Did do that, and I said, okay. And I think we had an auto dealer that were furnished a couple of people in different parts of the county, the state. I had a car, a little Plymouth Horizon from a dealership up in near Rennes. And I was driving that thing, had Bogan stickers all over it. And I said, this is going to be a piece of cake. Go over there. I-75, he told me about I-75 west over to Alabama. I said, that's nothing. I get to I-75, I'm in Alabama until I got over there. And it's a big area.
Yeah, it is.
And so I think I got stopped 9 times for speeding. And I guess Bo was doing real well then. I got warning tickets until one day I was leaving out of my own county here in Glenn County, got a ticket, and I figured I better pay it. So I think I'm not answering the full question.
No. How do?
And
yeah,
to talk about that whole campaign, the funny parts of it, Tom Coleman was former senator. He was co-chair of the campaign, and we got into I guess it was in a runoff. And he said, Woody, of course we didn't have cell phones and all that. He says, I just need to check on things down there in Southwest. How about running back down there and see what's going on? And I got down there when Bo Ginn's uncle was in a hunt club outside of Albany, and he came into the headquarters down there and said, Woody, let me show you this. And it was a letter, and it was a guy that was a chapter president for Georgia for NRA, And then the Georgia Wildlife Federation, their chairman has co-signed a letter saying they need everybody, and they've sent that to every hunt club in the state members, saying that Bo Ginn supported gun control. And so I called him back and said, I'm looking at this letter, yeah, that's not too good. And then I get back up to Dooley County, and I forgot the little town, but evidently the police cars, it wasn't in Vianna, it was up the other part of town there. And the Reagan family that were helping us. And I said, we may have some problems because the police cars up here got Joe Frank stickers on them.
That's a problem.
And the last one I had the most fun with was I got a call in the headquarters in that runoff, and somebody called on Sunday morning and said, here's a yellow DOT pickup truck down in Henry County, and here's the number of the DOT truck at mile marker so-and-so, and on its windshield, back windshield, is a Joe Frank bumper sticker for governor. All I can tell you is I called over to Tom Moreland's office. He answered the phone. He was not a happy camper.
No.
But anyway, that's the height of everything that went on.
Tom Moreland and Joe Frank's benefactor, Speaker Murphy, oil and water.
So
I bet.
So anyway, that was to think about everything back then without all that technology.
Yeah.
I told someone, if we had cell phones, we'd have won that thing.
Nip it in the bud. But because you and others had spent time trying to talk the congressman staying in Washington, staying in his role. How did you rate his chances of winning? I don't assume you would have wanted to jump on a losing campaign.
I was scared to death of those things, even when Bo was running for Congress. People would say a lot of things or anything sometimes, and you think, man, I'm riding good.
Right.
And then you have to find it out a different way, or
right.
Either it does live up to that. I just really was not I campaigned hard, but I always was scared to death of those things.
Right.
I enjoyed the public service part of it.
Sure. So, tell me about the runoff election night, as those votes came in, and the realization was beginning to settle over the campaign and the congressman.
Actually, both of those events, his primary night and the runoff night, it was something like you'd see in a movie. I mean, the enthusiasm and the excitement, and something like you'd see in a graduate or something, the candidate. And it was just completely devastating that it happened. But it took a while for me to even get. I had people coming when I got home to get me over to go to a luncheon that Joe Frank was going to be there. And I ended up. I got talked into going one. I sat at the back of the room. Tom Daniel, you remember Tom?
I know
Tom
the
Daniel
name.
was one of his campaign coordinators, and I think things had to get pretty rough. The issues got really, it got to be a pretty rough campaign.
Right.
When you got things like that I mentioned about the gun thing, you got things came into play like abortion and all these things that I just never been around. And it's like the gun control when Tom Daniel was working with the House, and they changed him out from being the chief of the campaign to get somebody a little bit stronger without getting into names in that. And
I think we all know.
I called him and Tom, we were in Leadership Georgia together. I heard y'all sent out 75,000 of those daggone letters about Bo supporting gun control. And he said, well, what did they did send letters out, but it wasn't 75,000. It was 130,000. So that's.
So basically,
and the abortion thing hurt.
And it sounds like, because, trying to put this into context for 2023 is Bo Ginn was not a leftist by any means, or even very liberal. He may have been center left on some issues.
That's a lot of fun. I mean, no, but I'll let you continue that in a second. But after it's funny how relationships after all these times, there are a lot of friendships that are really. I got to know Speaker Murphy quite well.
Oh, sure.
I got along fine with him.
Sure.
And he I think he had some respect for me. I remember going to something we were putting on in Atlanta years later, and our former majority leader in the House was down in Perry. Was his name?
Larry Walker.
Larry Walker. I had to work on one of his counties, which happened to be Dooley, and he said, "Your name?" And I told him. He said, "What's your background?" I said, "Well, I worked with Bo Gann." He said, "Oh, yeah, let me ask you, there was a guy in the campaign that was campaigning in one of my counties, and evidently said, this guy, his approach was that, look, they know that the Speaker summoned all the House members up right after they got at the Royal Coach Inn up there, and more or less said, y'all need to go to work." And this young man that was campaigning for Bo was saying, "Look, y'all need to be able to think for yourselves. You don't have to listen to every single thing and go by every single thing your House members believe in." And he said, "Were you capable of doing that?" And I looked at him and said, "That was me."
Yeah. You better believe it.
He was nice. He was good. Let me turn it.
Oh, yeah.
And anyway, you continue out.
No. What I was going to say was, did the race boil down to Joe Frank's campaign painting Bo Gann as sort of the out of touch liberal Washington, or
could have been. That could have been some of that. I didn't really pay that much attention to it. I do know that, for example, if you think about it, Bo had a couple of really unusual ads. One of them had him do an ad about drugs and stuff, and about shoving. Hello, meet the shover, with the jail thing. That did not hit well in certain elements of our society.
Sure.
And then apparently, he had one standing. He had an ad standing on the wing of a like a 747 or something like that, and it was about how he really, and that was a real feather in Bo's hat to keep Lockheed from Boeing, and that whole thing was out in McDonald's, Congressman McDonald's district out there in
7th,
and he felt like that he got snubbed somewhat, and he didn't get enough credit in that thing that Bo took it on and played it up, and he turned against Bo.
Interesting.
So it's just all right.
No. When a candidate loses like that, it obviously it changes their career, but all the staffers that worked for that individual, both in the House and on the campaign, when did you come to realize that, oh, this is a career-changing event for you?
Well, it was the morning after Bo lost. I had his car driving from somewhere. We were staying downtown, driving back out to Lenox to where the headquarters were. And I had his Cutlass, and it had USC 1. And I on the it's a regular tag. So I didn't pay attention to it. I pulled into the IHOP on Peach Street, you know where it is. And this car pulls in behind me, and there are two women in there in a Cadillac. And one of them, I forgot the name of the fellow. There's only one candidate for Republican thing for governor, and he lost. He tried it twice, I think. The woman said her husband was his campaign treasurer. Was his campaign treasurer, and are you Bo Gann? I said, "No, ma'am, I'm not. I'm just driving his car, but I've worked with him a long time." And she said, well, how'd you like to get involved in helping us in this campaign? I said, well, I'll be honest with you, lady, ma'am, I've had enough of this. No, ma'am, thank you. And I turned and I said, before I walked off, I said, oh, by the way, I will tell you though, if he's wants to have any chance of getting elected, he needs to carry a shotgun in one hand and a Bible in the other one.
And for the record, Bob Bell did not.
That's not
how Bob campaigned.
No, but I'm telling you, it was Bob Bell's. The secretary, the woman's husband, was campaign treasurer for him.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know who it was.
Right.
You've got a good memory.
Well, thank you. I'm a historian. It comes with the territory. So, how did you transition over from Bo Ginn's campaign to unemployment to Lindsey Thomas?
I got back to town, and of course, there's a period of time there where you got about 4 months before Bo leaves Congress. So I went back on staff, and went up to Washington and was helping pack up and everything. And while I was up there, the lifelong family friends that Bo had introduced me, I got introduced to Bo through. He was up there as a federal judge for GSA, Board of Contract Appeals, federal judge. And we loved to duck hunt and the daddy, and that's who I was living with temporarily, who introduced me into Atlanta, the Bo. And I went duck hunting and killed the hell out of mallards. And so I went back into town that afternoon from Leesburg and got some boxes, and I packed these ducks up in the boxes. And Bo walked in there, and he's funny as hell. Hey, Woodside, what you doing? I said, well, I'm just packing up a few lame ducks. And he taught me how to hunt, helped me buy my first gun. That's what I did, other stuff. And then, what's the other that's funny about him? Oh, when I got, of course, everything went away when we were all going. And I had, in the campaign for governor, the County Commission Association was meeting on Jekyll. And I went by and mentioned, and I was in there of that campaign for Bo with all those people statewide.
Yeah.
And around the fountain inside the Acorama, there was a group of kids that evidently had campaign signs for Lindsey Thomas. And I said, hey, I move around and everything, but I work with Bo Ginn and everything, and I need to meet your boss. Is he around? He said, no, he's taking a nap right now. But he'll be back around later today, or something. I said, well, I may have to be gone. And I said, well, I looked at him, I said, do me a favor, tell him you met me, and I gave him my name, and that I like what he has to say and everything. But I got to be very honest with you. You can tell him that if he has any chance or hope of wanting to be elected to Congress in this district, he needs to cut that damn mustache off. After all this race was over, I get a call when I'm back in Brunswick, and he said, Woody, this is Lindsey Thomas. I said, how are you doing, sir? And congratulations. He said, thank you. He said, look, I'd like to maybe see if you got some time to maybe run over here and see me. I'm going to be at the ballpark in Scriven with my boys playing baseball, and come by and maybe chat for a few minutes. So we did that, and I went over and sat in his car. We were watching the play, and he mentioned that he'd like to see if I had any interest in helping him set up and continue going and maybe continue working.
Yeah.
And I told him I'd be very excited about that opportunity. And he said, well, I've got to be very honest with you. I've heard something very negative about you. I said, what is it? And he told me that story about the mustache. And I said, well, 10 years ago, you couldn't have that happened. And I swear to God, he'll tell you too. He wasn't in Washington 3 weeks and it was gone.
Now, did you stayed in district?
I stayed in the district.
You stayed in the
sure
district,
did.
okay.
And so I
Just picked up right where you left off?
yeah, and then I felt like, I had been doing that for so long, I needed kind of like a new challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened, and I didn't tell anybody, what happened was, and I know him, an opportunity, and I'd worked around in chambers before.
Sure,
With
sure,
everything, even a different thing. And I got some guys, 3 past chairmen of the chamber came to see me because their normal thing had been hiring somebody out of Atlanta to come down for chamber improvement. And so I got offered, they came to see me and asked me if I would consider coming doing that. And I told them I would, but I've got to tell you that I'm not interested in trying to go to work with a chamber and then jump like they do to bigger chambers and stuff. I said, I've spent pretty much a good part of my life down here with this stuff. And if once I go and y'all think I've been gone enough, then I'm not going anywhere else. So that's what happened.
Man of your word.
And we enjoyed it. The advantage of that is just like in any profession, in politics too, is to know where the landmines are and where your supporters are. And I went through the chamber, enjoyed chamber life, and still do about what they do. But there's got to be a way of holding them and folding them in this mad political world. and the diversity we have, like in this county, for example, you've got to stay on top of the issues.
How would you say your experience as a congressional staffer informed your work and your approach as a chamber president in the district that you had worked in?
Well, to be honest with you, when you're supporting areas of economic development and community development and committed to trying to improve the quality of life of what you do as a business community, there are a lot of close affiliations there and ways to go. And my advantage was having an appreciation at the state level and building relationships there. I'm talking about with the Georgia Chamber coming down. They used to have a program called the Georgia Pre-Legislative Forum. And asked Rogers about that because he was around it. And every year they would take 1 or 2 busloads of state leaders and all your hierarchy lobbyists and put them on the bus, and they would take it on a show on the road for 5 days to different key places.
Sure.
And they love coming down.
Sounds like the new faculty tours.
Yeah, they come
UGA
down here,
does.
and then they have a whole big room full of all of them, and they do their thing. And that's how a lot of them. That's why I've developed relationships back then, just doing that because they love to stop. And helping them with other things, pre-legislative forums. I mean, red carpet tours.
Oh, yeah.
all that stuff. I just kept building years of. I probably did about helped them. Our chamber helped hosted about 6 of them maybe.
Right.
And I hated half time. I hated because up until that last 2, we had to raise the money.
Ooh.
Now they'll pay for it themselves with the sponsors.
Right.
But it was a regional thing. I could make it region. Savannah would only have involved Richmond Hill maybe and them. I'd try to make it Selmiller's Economic Development Districts, District 10, would involve every one of the counties to have some participation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's and the governmental affairs thing was always important and became more important, and that was where, fortunately, I had some background
Right.
in relationships with the state guys and with the Fed guys. So that thing with deepening the harbor.
Sure.
That was
Sure.
with Lindsay and all them and Bo. And when that bridge got hit the second time in '87,
I forgot about the second.
And locked it in an up position for 6 months. It turned that Jekyll Island Causeway entrance to St. Simon's Causeway entrance on 17 into a 17.5-mile trip when it's normally 4 or 3.5.
Ooh. Ooh.
So that became, then Paul Warwick was a very dynamic county mayor. He said, let's get everybody together and let's start talking about getting rid of this thing. And then Lindsay worked hard and got it declared, that bridge declared by the Coast Guard as a potential hazard of navigation, which
it clearly was.
Immediately funded 50% of it, and then the state got involved. And then the last thing was to do it, to get it deepened from 30 feet to 36 feet.
Right.
When Bo was around, early days, Georgia Ports Authority and Brunswick Ports Authority existed down here. The key thing they thought was concentration was Savannah.
Right. Garden City.
Governor Vandiver, part of the Russell family.
That's
too.
right.
He called one day and he's driving into vacation over at his condo on St. Simon's, and he said, "Woody, I was coming down. I want to call and congratulate y'all that y'all got this new card thing coming in there, a big announcement for kids
right.
or whatever." And he says, I actually bought that island out there, and
Colonel's Island, is that
when I was governor. And he said, I decided dropping in on the way in town, and they ran me off. You think you can get me a tour?
I've heard this story.
Can you give me a tour?
I think Jane told me that story.
I said, I called up the Georgia Ports Authority. I said, y'all, I got to tell you something. Story here. You think we can fix this? And not only did they fix it, I've got him out there. They ended up having a big celebration, and they were going to. They were talking about changing the Colonel's Island to Vandiver Island. Willow Smith went nuts, and I said, "Let's think of another thing here." And I finally started thinking about it. Why don't we call it Vandiver Point out there? And that solved the whole thing.
I did not know that about Vandiver Point, but I gave a talk at we were talking about David Bell at lunch, your fellow Citadel alum. I gave a talk at his annual symposium about Governor Vandiver and had pictures of him dedicating the state docks and at Colonel's Island and how that really set off a chain of events that were really unforeseen. Obviously, they expected economic development, but I don't think anybody expected what we now have with Brunswick and Savannah.
And Bo was in those years, first few years he was in office, people were getting kind of upset at the lack of concentration and support of really pumping this harbor up too. And I do know that the Fendigs, or Mr. Fendig's gone now, but Bo actually flew to Atlanta, I guess before he was going back one weekend, to a morning board meeting of the Georgia Ports Authority that's being held in Atlanta. And he went up there and jumped. He said, he don't know if he jumped on him. I doubt he forcefully said, guys, we got to do something about this, and y'all need to concentrate on that. The investment's been made, and that's when they came down here and they absorbed the Brunswick Ports Authority, and you've seen what's happened.
Right. Now that's an interesting question, and something I should probably know more about is how do folks in Brunswick and Savannah, how do they view the different ports? Is it a competition? Is it cooperation? Is it a zero-sum game? Do the ports appeal to different clientele? Do they serve different purposes?
Probably also, but there was also a time that there was an impression, well, it's us versus them. And then comments, every time they received comments, we had to keep encouraging them to make sure you include Brunswick and the focus there. And then it became, that's why I always had them engaged in our Washington fly-ins and all that kind of stuff. And then we started, in fact, I forgot to tell you, we started working with them to have a state of the port every year. And we started that down here and one there, and then they got to the point that it really works with the current chairman. I mean, they've got better every year. And they're really good at putting together the programs that focuses on more on this part when it's here, but certainly has all the statistics.
Sure.
And that made all the difference in the world. So,
representation matters, as they say. Representation matters, as they say. So, you know, you were chamber president for 34 years. If you had to sum up in a couple sentences, you know, a paragraph, the transformation of this area's economy from when you began in '85 to when you retired in 2019.
I will back up to tell you that
we're off to a good start so far.
You come back to that.
I will.
When this 1970, probably 1974, we were in transit. The largest major thing was getting ready to be completed. And that was the completion of I-95.
Right.
The whole system.
That took 4 years to build that.
The whole system. Yep. And the worst part of building that thing was from exit 29 to exit 36.
Yep.
And I guess I was...
Is that through Liberty?
I was working on congressional staff with Bo. Yeah. And I get a telephone call from the business leaders. This is congressional staff days, although that wasn't very chamber to me.
Right.
It wasn't at the time. And to come meet with the business leaders out on I-95 at exit 36. 38 was not even really there.
Right.
And so we're out there, all the hoteliers, restaurant people, and they were demanding. He said, what the Moreland put in place was, until that last segment was completed, everybody coming down I-95 north-south would get off and they'd take a left and go down about 2 miles and take a right on 303 and go down and get off right into exit 29 and then go south. That was the only way.
And it was like that for a long time.
Except he also decided, I'm going to be fair to people on 17 too. So people coming northbound are going to get off at exit 29. I'm going to take them up by Jekyll and on up 17 and take them out to hit the spur. The spur was only a 2-lane road. It was, that wasn't a spur then.
Right.
And get you out to a exit 38, which nothing was on. So all the northbound was going that way. And I've had to go meet with both groups and then both get Bo again to get in the state to do this. So I called Moreland. And I said, I've just been going through this thing right here, and he said, well, Woody, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm gonna call a press conference. I tell Bo I'll be glad to call a press conference this afternoon, and tell him I'm changing it, all of it, to go one way or all the way go the other way, and that Bo again asked me to do this. I said, I think you need to keep doing what you're doing. I told Bo about it, being laughing. Vernon Martin was another big person. The Coastal Area Planning and Development Commission, you wouldn't know it now, CRCs. Mm-hmm. We have a CRC for 8, 10 counties. We got 16 of them in the state. Vernon Martin was head of it, and the guy's dead now, but I wish you could have known him, was down in Musgrove.
Right.
And
he was a highway commissioner.
That's right. Yeah, highway commissioner. Yeah. And I think at one time revenue commissioner briefly.
I think so.
So he was like a second father.
The state route into Jekyll, I think, is named for Musgrave.
Anyway, that's right. But he was around the time we're trying to get that bridge. He was very instrumental in that bridge. Bubba McDonald.
Mm-hmm.
Bubba McDonald, dear friend, he was chairman of the Appropriations Committee in the House. And
he replaced Joe Frank.
That's right. And he also kept the money in the budget to finish that bridge, sitting on their bridge. There's some people that did not want to do that.
Really?
And he kept it in, yeah. And he's reminded me before, and I've reiterated that.
It's hard to believe now. Maybe it's not so hard to believe when it's not a completed project.
It may have been a governor. A governor, I don't know. Either way. Bubba McDonald is still one of my dearest friends, and you've probably been around him.
No, I never had the.
You changed the life of everything, real life. Anyway, he kept telling me his grandson, Lauren, is in the General Assembly. His son. Mm-hmm. Lauren's got two boys. Bubba kept telling me that and they both went to Riverside Military Academy, and he wanted them to go to the oldest one to go to Wiley, to go to either Air Force Academy or Naval Academy. Turned out he didn't get in either one. Why, I don't know. Bubba says it's become a Democratic member up there at Woodside. I don't know that. The boy went, and I said, he's going to Citadel. It's right down the road and get you closer to you. He ends up getting in and going. That's where he went.
Oh, yeah?
And he's just finishing his sophomore year, gold stars, 4.0 every semester in that atmosphere up there in mechanical engineering.
Ooh, wow. In mechanical engineering.
His minor is
wow.
in Chinese, and he speaks fluently of that. He was a state champion in wrestling and all that. I'm the hell with this, I want to be a Marine. He's got gold stars, he's going to be a Marine officer. His brother, because of COVID, and him went to played football. Wiley did his last year, and the other one's finishing right now. Who was all conference in whatever that racket game is on the field.
Oh, yeah.
And then he also football, and he's getting ready to enter Citadel himself and play football. So it's cadets.
Right.
Okay, I'm through with that.
Yeah. It's the alumni moment.
Sorry.
A proud alumnus. No, so when we're talking about how much the coast has changed, and I can attest to how much it's changed and grown in the 15 years that I've lived in Georgia. What's the future hold for coastal Georgia economy and society? It just seems to be, Georgia economy is rip roaring by any measure, and the coast is right along is a strong part of that. What's the future hold? The challenges we've had have been a lot of issues dealing with our wetlands issues, mm-hmm.
Our flood issues,
Sure.
Our workforce issues is everywhere.
Sure.
It just amazes me with all these job announcements coming up in that core area in Atlanta. I wonder where they get all the people. I've started to think about up in the northern part of our coastal area, mm-hmm. with all that draw for those major employers. I think there's going to be opportunities as a result of those major opportunities up in that core area for satellite businesses to feed and support the manufacturing needs they're going to have.
Mm-hmm.
Transit issues are, to me, something important because of our workforce being able to move about in this region to have affordable transportation to get people to and from work. Affordable housing, you've heard that. It's kind of,
Sure.
It's kind of a thing that's regurgitating all the time, but the housing issues for the workforce and I think, of course, on all the federal issues that we're having to deal with to build that. One important thing is always keeping in mind is keeping FLETC strong, Kings Bay growing strong. Port, the highway systems, transportation systems, the infrastructure there, and I think we're going to probably have to spend a lot more time on the how we're going to get trucks off the road and put them on rail.
I was driving past the I-16 development last night,
and all these rural counties along here, up to the Highway 82 corridor and the 341 corridors. It's ironic that it was I think back in the days of we're talking about Vernon and some people, the former mayor of Willacoochee headed up that RDC up that way, talked about the multimodal corridor that you may have heard about, which we called it Corridor Z.
Yep.
And then later became get a name for it. It took forever to just name it, but that whole thing to Kansas City and back.
Yep.
All that was amazing. They thought about it. Well, it turned into, Zell knew what to do with it. We're going to start a developmental highway program, and Corridor Z is the first one. And so the next thing we lobbied with Chambers, when we got together, it was Highway 341, and well, remember the last connection was in Odom to get the thing finished. So I think that that and the marketing effort for this state to get out there somehow to give that inducement for rural Georgia got to happen.
Right. Well, we've talked about Joe Frank quite a bit in this interview, not necessarily on purpose, but tangentially. But in the 80s, the big thing was the two Georgias, with Professor Floyd and his article and how big of a splash that made. And you can argue now there are two Georgias, three Georgias. There's probably as many as you can create a category for. But how do you think? How have you witnessed or experienced those challenges of being outside of the metro Atlanta core, and what were the challenges? But what are the opportunities for a place like coastal Georgia and those corridors to the interior, like you were talking about?
Come back at me.
Yeah. Do you think? I'm trying how best to say this. Is coastal Georgia different from back when that article came out? It was basically Atlanta and everything else. Has coastal Georgia gotten to a point where it needs to be thought of as something separate from Southwest Georgia, for example, or some of the depopulating areas in the center of the state, something like that?
It's probably what's happening in a way.
Yeah.
We're having, I forgot the counts now, but for the busiest corridor in the country on the interstate system on 95. And the more it's been exposed to our beauties and what's happened, it's been drawing them. And with what's happened with the national economy, people are looking to go where they can survive. And
sure. You're talking about housing affordability, for example.
Cost of living. I mean, we're still. Bo used to think we were we were one of the last adventurers, really. I remember him saying that that we were. He actually, his big thing was, coastal Georgia is a sleeping giant. It's going to wake up one day. And he also thought one of the major issues that we're going to end up facing one day is water. He did do that. But, I think that it's being marketed very well as a quality of recreation and where to live. And I think if you look at the number of retirees that have bounced into the coast of Georgia,
I know how many have come into Athens, Clark County.
right up to Richmond Hill, and I think that something else is going to take place is anyone who can get themselves near the river systems and the ecotourism opportunities. Have you ever been on the Ottawa River?
I've never been on it, no.
Oh my God. I will get somebody just take you and your family when you come.
Yeah.
We're going to grow in spite of ourselves, and we better do it the right way.
Sure.
I mean, we're having real challenges even in Glenn County to make sure we're doing things the right way.
Smart growth, as they say.
Yeah, I guess you call that.
You're not supposed to point out what I'm doing back there.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of anything else that I.
Well, what have you been up to since retirement? You slowed down any, or you still just go?
I enjoy working with. I've been with the hospital authority a long time. Some friends. Of course, we've been pushing for good things, and it's good seeing a lot of these things happening with people putting the right investments in and coming out of downtown Brunswick. That's coming along.
Yeah.
Have you been down there?
I've only been through it on my way out here.
I've
driven through a few times. You mentioned the hospital, and one thing that Georgia, and similar with other states, is something of a rural hospital crisis, in that these smaller counties that don't have large populations but have maybe aging populations with increasing medical needs. Has that put a lot of pressure on Brunswick and Glenn counties' medical resources, and if so, how has it adapted to serve those?
I forgot, and I'll talk to you offline about it.
Sure.
We're working with it's a federal health care initiative that evidently put dollars into providing health care to meet those that are not uninsured, and that is growing. So we're working with those types of initiatives with our health system to help meet those needs, because we've got, free health care. I mean, unpaid health care is that's hurt a lot of hospitals, and we're having to put up $70 million or more in health care. I forgot the thought of what the question was.
I was just talking about how
the health care,
how the counties adapted to that.
We just finished a $140 million expansion in the middle of COVID.
Sounds like Piedmont and Athens.
It is, and we're dealing with the health care cost, as you know, and where we're headed there. It has not been the best of time for our investment revenues for any hospitals. We're actually have grown in the way of hiring health physicians, and so and we're also only nonprofit hospital. We have one hospital in this community.
How many counties does the Glenn County healthcare system serve?
We serve 5 or 6 counties.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, we've got, for example, we have a healthcare draw from these other counties too.
Sure.
But we got another healthcare facility in Camden County. Mm-hmm. That's a smaller hospital. And so we're up to 300, maybe 16 or 20 beds. I think we've done quite well for the specialties. Of course, you've been reading everything about all this stuff going on about CONs. That's it's been very much of a challenge, especially those smaller hospitals.
Yeah.
Come in, and you've seen a number of them close.
Right.
And we're going to have to do a better way of this hospital too, in reaching out to grab those people that got to be served somehow.
Right. Well, Woody, I think we've covered a lot of territory in about an hour and a half, and I know that you've got something at 3 that you need to be at. So, thank you very much for your time and participating in this oral history.
Well, I'll be seeing you tomorrow.
Yes, you will.
I guess you know what to do to take care of your time down here.
Yes, sir. Yep. I've got my my dancing card is pretty full. So
I can't wait for you to see all those other people.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun.